Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and what's next. It's a show that asks questions and peels back the layers of our average everyday experience and goes beyond scratching the surface. We interview people doing incredible things who are making a difference around the globe. Join me as we listen in and get one step closer to understanding that big ideas shared create collaboration. Collaboration can inspire community, and communities create social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. So every now and then I do an interview where I feel like I've sort of stepped back in time, and yet I've got this ability to kind of see into the future. I had this opportunity today, and I interviewed the former mayor of Toronto, David Miller, who has practiced law for many years, but who's also now running the World Wildlife Federation, WWF, here in Canada. We talked about so many things. We talked about his move from politics to the environment, and we talked about climate change and a common purpose. We talked about Margaret Thatcher, which is kind of interesting, and about their Living Planet report, and we talked about the immediacy of the almighty dollar and how the economic system that we currently have built around us is based on immediate sort of gratification. And we talked about leadership, and I think one of the things for me, we had a few laughs as well. I think David actually sings, believe it or not, in the interview. But we talked about listening, and we talked about leadership and about the importance of that for whatever it is that we're doing. We talked about how community and about how wanting to or needing to get engaged and dig a little deeper and go beyond scratching the surface was so essential to the common good and to doing the right thing. So buckle up. Not one of my longer interviews, but I think you're going to really enjoy it, and you might even listen to it twice. David Miller on Face to Face. So welcome to Face on this beautiful Monday morning. That probably doesn't mean too much to you because you're listening probably about 3 weeks from now, all those out there in David Peck Alive Land and Rabble Land. We've got a really interesting guest with us today, David Miller, former mayor of Toronto, and he's, I believe, the president of WWF. Thanks for joining us today, David.
Well, it's a pleasure. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, I think.
We've covered everyone.
Kind of the eternal world of the internet.
That's exactly right.
And I guess good night. Oh, it sounds like goodbye.
Well, what's so amazing to me is that somebody, 3 weeks from now could be listening to this in Burkina Faso. That's pretty cool when you think about it.
Let's not get our hopes up.
That's right. That's right. I've heard you're very popular. So mayor, politician, activist, academic on some level. I heard you speak at the Beyond GDP event not long ago at the Humber College, at Humber College here in Toronto. So you've moved sort of from politics to the environment, to animal rights and so on. I mean, what's the connection? Or is there even a connection? Do you see it as a radical shift?
Well, I think the connection for me is always, or at least since a relatively young age, there's been two things that have motivated me. One is a sense of social justice and inclusion, and the second has been a passion for nature and the environment. And I think, at the moment, the issue of climate change connects both quite intimately, because climate change is obviously a huge issue for nature and the environment, but it's also an issue for people from the perspective of social justice, because the impacts of climate change are felt far more by the least well-off amongst us. But those two things have motivated me always. They motivated me, or at least social justice motivated me to get into law and become a lawyer, because I really believe that through the law you could create justice. Which is somewhat true, perhaps, probably not entirely true. And it motivated me a lot in my political career. If you look back on my time as mayor, we had quite extraordinary achievements in both the realm of social justice and the environment. So after I left office, I went back to the practice of law and really enjoyed it. I was treated very well by an excellent law firm, Airden Burles, one of the best, if not the best, law firms in Canada, and in my view, terrific lawyers. But the one thing I missed was that sense of community well-being. And I was working on environmental initiatives broadly defined, like helping, finance clean energy, those kinds of things. But I really, that sense of common purpose, and once I'd moved originally from the private practice of law to politics, I had a chance to work on that sense of common purpose, both about social justice, the environment, and other issues. I missed that. So WWF is a fantastic organization because they're international. They've got a presence nationally in Canada. We're doing some really superb work bringing together the issues of nature and people. Our philosophy is that we should find solutions that help both people and nature thrive, so that this idea that the economy and the environment are opposed, we're trying to bring them together. And it's a great opportunity for me, a great organization, and when offered the opportunity, I jumped at the chance.
Love to talk about that opposition in a second, that nature versus people or so on. Why is it that we seem to polarize these issues? Instead of talking about a community being inclusive, it seems that so often these things are exclusive. In a second, how come you're not a cynic? Politician, lawyer, now you work in the nonprofit sector.
Well, I've seen...
Or maybe you are a cynic, I don't know.
No, I've seen what change is possible when people decide to do it. And ultimately, it's in the hands of people. Often government gets described as sort of this thing outside of us out there. But it really isn't. It's actually us. And it's the same thing, in the nonprofit world. If we can come together around a cause, we can make really important, significant change. And I saw it in my political career, both as a councillor and as mayor. I saw it as head of the C40 international cities, 40 of the largest cities in the world working together on climate change. And I see it today in the nonprofit world, and I've got absolutely no doubt about that. People are busy. Particularly when you got a young family, you're very busy putting food on the table and taking care of your kids. But people want to do the right thing. They want to be part of a society that's doing the right thing. And when they decide to, people can make amazing change.
So you do believe in the power of one, at the risk of sounding cliche, one vote, $1, one volunteer hour, etc.?
Well, we have in our house, we have this little saying of, I think everybody's probably heard it, but I think it's true. There's a boy throwing starfish back. It's hanging in our bathroom. And, the man says to him, there's thousands of them. You can't make a difference. And he throws a starfish back and he says, well, I made a difference for that one. We are here at the corner of Mount Pleasant and Eglinton. Just across the street is a school that has a purpose-built daycare. This is a political story, but it's about people coming together in different neighborhoods, some well off, some less well off. That school was built by the Bob Rae NDP government in Ontario, and they had a philosophy that schools should be kind of community hubs and should have children, and neighborhoods should have access to the buildings because they're public buildings, including for athletic activities. And that you should have purpose-built daycares inside the schools. And as part of that program, 6 schools happened to be completed in 1995, 1996, just at the end of the government or after the government, with purpose-built daycares that the Mike Harris government, when they got elected, cut the funding for. I don't know whether it was because they believed that, there shouldn't be both parents working or whatever archaic philosophy they had. Mm-hmm. They said, we're not going to fund those purpose-built daycares in schools, which is, on every possible measure, completely short-sighted. And so the people in the communities who were being served, one of which was Parkdale, where I represented as a councillor, spoke up and said, we want these daycares. And the elected officials, Ann Johnson in this neighborhood, John Godfrey in this neighborhood, who was a member of Parliament, and I and a couple others, worked to get some funding from the then regional government to have the daycares run. And we managed to make it happen. But we couldn't have made it happen if the people weren't there. And, that was, let's say, 1996, possibly 97, almost 20 years ago.
Wow.
So there's 20 years of children who've had access to high quality early learning opportunities in Central Aikington School right across the street here, Parkdale Public, 4 other schools across Toronto. That's hundreds, possibly thousands of kids,
yeah,
right?
When you think of the potential, I'm working on an initiative helping to raise some funds for young Malawian men and women coming out of high school. To get them through high school, 4 years of high school education, for 200 kids. 200 kids could change the future of that country if they get the right education and they get put in. You know what I mean? And it's all about those splash and ripple. I mean, it sounds so corny on some level, but here you
I don't think it sounds corny. It's
20
real.
years of infrastructure.
Right. It's 20 years of children having high quality education who otherwise would have missed that opportunity. 20 years of parents being able to work knowing their children were safe and learning. I mean, it's massively important. And that's one little, small thing I can point to. And it all starts with people coming together. And people want to, they're anxious to. I found one of the things I found when I was mayor was, particularly on environmental issues, people stopped me all the time and said, what can I do? What can I do, Mr. Mayor? What can I do?
Amazing.
And that sense of community is really part of all of us. Margaret Thatcher once said something along the lines of...
Surprised you're quoting Margaret Thatcher.
Well, she said...
That's another story.
Well, just to show how wrong she was. She said there's no such thing as community. It's completely ludicrous. Right. And everybody knows that's not true.
Wow.
Right? If you're in a small town in Newfoundland or a small fishing village that was devastated because of the moratorium on cod fishing 20 years ago, your whole community suffered. It's not you as an individual, it's the whole community. And I'm just thinking of that because we happen to be working with the fishing industry in Newfoundland to try and bring back the cod fishery on a sustainable basis. But that sense of community is there, it's real, it's manifest in people. Sometimes people are a bit quiet because they are busy. They got to take care of their own lives, but they will come together around issues or needs and make things happen. I got no doubt about that, and I've seen it too many times.
So young people supposedly don't vote, and I think some of the stats suggest that that's true. Do you think, is that an apathy? Or is it a disregard? Is it a disrespect? Is it I too believe, like you, that community exists and that people come together and get things done, and I believe in that splash and ripple effect and domino effect and so on. But do you think individually we really do believe it? Like sometimes I wonder, I teach at Humber College, and I sometimes I see these postgraduate students in international development who seem to lack a certain edge, passion, commitment.
Well, young people develop at different rates, and my view of the typically lower voting rates amongst young people is that politicians aren't appealing to them, aren't addressing their issues. And they don't see somebody that motivates them to vote for. And I think that's actually pretty straightforward. And one of the greatest compliments I ever had as a politician, and this came more after I was mayor than councillor, because you're far more well known because you're in the media all the time.
Right.
I used to get stopped regularly, I'd say almost every day, for 7 years. In fact, I still get stopped, but not quite every day on this point, and told by quite young people that I was the first person they ever voted for.
Wow.
Which is incredibly, it's obviously a compliment, but it's an incredibly engaging comment, because it's saying that, in effect, they weren't motivated to vote, or at least that the values I stood for did motivate them to vote.
Resonated with them on some level.
Yes. And so I know from my own, and that's like a decade of being stopped every day. It's lots and lots of people. And so that told me very clearly that when we speak as people seeking public office, when we speak to the values and projects and issues that young people care about, they're going to vote. And I think that's a big part of the challenge.
Where do you think the whole authenticity and transparency thing comes into play from a political perspective? They're all liars. Talk about cliche.
Yeah,
And I think, frankly, having worked in the nonprofit sector for so many years, sometimes I wonder that about nonprofit leaders. You know, saying one thing, doing another. And
I think you have to be authentic, and you obviously have to be transparent. There's no question about that. But the best politicians, to me, are authentically themselves. And it's very clear who they are. And it's clear to everybody, and they don't, deviate from who they are. You can learn and grow as a politician. I think people accept that and accept your positions changing over time as evidence of you learning and growing. But, somebody who says different things to different people, first of all, how do they do it? Like, how do you remember that yesterday, you supported
Totally.
X and today you
Fair
supported
enough.
not
Yeah.
X?
Yeah.
But secondly, I think that's what makes people really cynical. I've met a lot of elected officials, and the vast majority of them have been well-meaning people who are really trying to make a difference. There are some who are in it just for power or other reasons, but that's true in every walk of life, right? But not everybody has the highest motives. I think the vast majority of politicians are motivated to make a positive difference to the city, the province, or the country. But some get a little scared. Particularly if you've been elected a while, it's a real privilege, and you don't want to lose.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
I always took the philosophy I'd rather lose fighting for what I believed in
Right.
than equivocate. Imagine equivocating on your principles and then losing. Imagine how you'd feel.
Right.
Right? That would just be awful.
Sadly, some of those folks probably still can sleep well at night. I think that's sort of what got them in that place, that position in the first place.
Well, I can understand the pressures that lead you to that.
Yeah,
It's obviously
yeah.
a little bit different with party politics.
Yeah, sure.
When you're part of a party, you're buying into an overall philosophy,
Yeah.
and you have to accept that you're not going to win every battle within that philosophy. It's part of, so you may have to accept that on some issue, the party's position isn't quite as strong as you want. But when you're running for municipal office, it's you.
You spoke, so we're definitely a thread here. I love it. You spoke, or I heard you speak recently. You talked about somewhere in Canada there was an issue, I believe, with foxes stealing chickens. I'm going to just throw that out there. I don't know if it is. And you said really quickly, and the solution is we're going to shoot the foxes. I spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia and Cambodia. There is a dolphin, a freshwater dolphin called the Irrawaddy dolphin. That's pretty rare. That's endangered. I've seen them from a distance. They're kind of funny and ugly looking, actually. They're endangered. Why do I care about that? Why should I care that a farmer's shooting a fox that's eating his chickens? I don't know if that was the actual story, David.
It was wolves.
Wolves, thank you.
And
Yeah.
what had happened is wolves are becoming more of a predator because we've built these wolf highways that are also known as oil pipelines and electricity grids, but they become wolf highways. And so the solution to that is shoot the wolves instead of trying to change the human activity in a way that doesn't create an imbalance in nature. Why should we care about nature? Well, first of all, there's a religious, moral issue here. I'm an Anglican, and when I lived in England as a young boy, the church was everything. My mum was the teacher in the village, the teacher.
That's awesome.
Which is maybe why I believe so much in community, right? Because I saw it in
Right.
our little village.
Right. You mean you don't buy into Thatcher's comment?
No. And you know what? I was in Scotland speaking in 2011. It's 4 years ago. And I was driven to the airport. They were very gracious, which was about an hour from where we were speaking. And we drove through a town. And the driver said, "You see this town?" And I said, "Yes, 2011, okay." I said, "Yes." He said, "Nobody has worked here since Margaret Thatcher." Like, that's how devastating she was. Just destroyed communities blithely out of some incredibly wrong-headed economic theory. And that damage still occurs.
Wow.
And it's funny in the politics of the right, they have these simplistic ideas. We still see it in the school system in Toronto. It's still suffering from the cuts of the Harris government in 97, 98, 99. Still really suffering. Anyway.
And isn't that what you're sort of saying by let's shoot the wolves? That's
Yeah.
the simplistic response.
It's a simplistic-
Let's not talk about it or get a few ideas up on the whiteboard maybe. wolves are honing in on our chickens or whatever. Let's shoot them.
And this is why democracy matters, and the ability to discuss and debate issues. Because we can learn a lot from the First Nations people in Canada, whose tradition, much more so, is to discuss an issue through until you can come to a common position, which might take a very long time.
Right.
But it's very important when you actually hear other people and listen to them. Very, very important. And that's part of the importance of people being engaged in politics or with nonprofits, and the politicians or the nonprofit leaders, the academic leaders, any segment of society, making sure that people know their voice is respected and listened to, because you do come up with much better solutions. So, going to the wolf call, does it make, well, first of all, let me go back. There's a moral issue here.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Do we as human beings have the right to destroy this planet? Do we have the right to destroy species? I think the answer is no. In the Anglican Church when I was a boy, one of our hymns was "All things bright and beautiful," right? All things bright and beautiful. The good Lord made them all. And it if you see the world that way, whether you're religious or not, doesn't really matter to me whether you're religious. I think the moral issue is the same, and it's the same across religions. We don't have the right to eliminate species, to destroy the planet. We've inherited the planet, and we have an obligation to leave it in better shape for the next generation. That's what I got taught when we came to Canada. One of the things that helped me become Canadian was going canoeing. I love it to this day.
That's a great phrase. Something that helped me become Canadian was going canoeing.
Well, it's true.
Maybe we should invoke that at the higher level.
Well, maybe we should.
I'm in Ottawa next week. Anyone I can talk to?
Well, talk to them all.
Let's talk to them all. Yeah.
They as came here as a 9-year-old boy who knew cricket and soccer, right? And rain, how to deal with rain.
Right.
And I found snow, 40 below zero temperatures. We were in Ottawa. And no cricket, no soccer, just hockey. And I really didn't feel Canadian until in grade 9 I went on a canoe trip.
Cool.
To Algonquin Park. And one of the things we were taught was you had to leave your campsite in better condition than when you got there, i.e. more natural. And I think that philosophy should apply to the planet. World Wildlife Fund, our Living Planet report last year showed that since the 1970s, 52% of all of the wildlife in the world has disappeared.
Wow.
More than half. Not species, actual populations of wildlife. And that's really frightening. And, we see it, whales were harvested by humans for whale oil and blubber, huge diminishing, and to the extent that we basically had to ban whaling around the world. The tiger is incredibly threatened. We see all sorts of species, huge impacts from oil and gas development in Alberta, for example. I don't think we have the right as humans to behave that way. It's mostly because of human economic activity. Lately, climate change has a huge impact. Polar bear habitat is threatened in the north because the sea ice season is much less. And what happens is the polar bears need the sea ice to feed, because they feed on seals on the ice. And if the season when they feed is shorter, they're less healthy, and mothers can't necessarily feed their cubs, and there's a whole negative chain. And we're seeing this happening right now. We have an obligation, I think, as humans, because we have created these problems. We know they're real. The scientists all tell us they're real. We have an obligation to find solutions.
Aren't the free marketers going to find the solutions? Aren't the
No.
entrepreneurs going to come up with a Wolf Highway-like initiative?
Because the reason the market doesn't work here is there's no value in our economic system on nature, on diversity of species. There's no real value on the future, and we know that. For example, if somebody is going to invest in an energy retrofit in a building, they want a 3 or 4 year payback. That's that.
Right.
Right.
Well, and it's the same in development, right? You get the big donor, DFAT-D, comes alongside and says, here's $3 million. Tell us what you did in 1, 3, or 5 years.
Yes.
You kind of can't do that.
It's not 10 or 20. We just don't. The government doesn't think enough about, all they do think in the longer run, because the government exists in the long run. So it does think to some degree, but doesn't think enough. And the private sector is not because they're bad people. Money, the value of money is very immediate. So they don't price in the future. They also don't price in nature. They don't price in carbon. So all of these things aren't accounted for in the economic system. Sure, entrepreneurial innovation can help overcome some of these problems, but economists, and that's what I studied with economics, call it all externalities, i.e. things that are randomly outside the economy. And of course it's not.
Academics call it footnotes.
Footnotes, yes. Yeah. Well, the planet is not a footnote.
Yeah.
Right? It's where we live, and we only have one of them.
Their article in the Globe on I'm sure it's all over the net, but some couple of guys, 120 hours to fly from Switzerland to Japan with a solar-powered plane. I forget, was it 25 miles an hour? I don't know if I want to get in that plane. I don't know about you. But I mean, those kind of things do make me hopeful.
Oh, sure.
For sure.
There's lots of potential.
Yeah.
But we have to collectively decide we're going to make these things happen.
Yeah.
And
back to community. I love it.
And people do want it to happen.
Yeah.
People will be fascinated by that solar plane. The electric cars starting to come, but why is the internal combustion car having such staying power? It's cheaper. Why is it cheaper? Well, one of the reasons is all the externalities caused by burning oil are not priced in. So there's, sure, technology has a place, entrepreneurs have a place, but so does leadership. And
it's good. It's good. I mean, I think that's a great place to end. I always feel like when I speak to anyone actually in this sort of field, international development, social justice, social change, that we're barely scratching the surface, and maybe we can do a part 2 down the road. But thanks for taking the time today to talk about the future.
Well, happy to do it. Appreciate being on, and I'm going to make that last point again. Technology has a place. Entrepreneurs have a place, but so does leadership. And in Paris this fall, we're going to see if the countries of the world can show that kind of leadership. And I'm a little bit optimistic. Cities have shown that leadership. There's been lots of mayors have been leaders. There's some business leaders are starting to show leadership. Lots of nonprofits. People want to see real change and a result. It's not going to solve all the issues. It's only about climate change. Lots of other things happening. But if we see real leadership there, I think it will give people hope. And when people have that hope, they start to act themselves as well. And I think it always comes back to all of us, not just a few. But at some moments, you need that leadership, and this is one of them.
Wonderful way to end. Thanks so much for your time today.
Pleasure.